Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I am far more fond of speaking about rights than I am of speaking about duties. But on this occasion, I begin with a duty. A duty upon all of us, of which we were instructed by the Holy Prophet himself, peace be upon him. And that duty is to seek knowledge. So may there be blessings upon us for coming here to listen to Professor Brown. And even greater blessing may there be upon him for coming here to impart this knowledge to us. We have only traveled a short distance. He has come a long way. Now, it is sometimes thought that at the time when the Prophet laid down the duty of which I have spoken, he also said, seek knowledge even if you have to travel to China. Probably that was not said. But it is an illustration of the nature of the duty. And an illustration of the illustration is, of course, that Professor Brown has traveled here to us in China. I will not take up too much of your time because you will have many questions to ask him. And when you ask him questions, remember this, that one great Islamic jurist, one of the four, some of you will know whom, I'll tell you later if you ask me, said that he was never concerned when discussing matters of religion or religious law with whether God would reveal the truth through his words or the words of the other person. So I will listen to your questions and Professor Brown's answers with great interest. And from one, or perhaps both of them, let some truth emerge. I have been professionally concerned with what I suppose is called a secular constitution, which favors no particular religion. A great Islamic scholar of modern times said that to be a Muslim by free will and conviction, which is the only way that you can be a Muslim, he needed a secular constitution. I'm not sure that my agreement with that reaches 100%. Because I'm sure that a devout Muslim, if faced with a human law that said you have to be a devout Muslim, would simply be unaffected by it. It would be an irrelevance. Now, in a secular constitution, very typically constitutions would contain structural provisions laying down the powers of government and how the organs of government, executive, legislative, judicial, are constituted. Those are the structural provisions of the Constitution. And of course, democracy lies within provisions of that time, when it provides for how these organs of government are created. Another part of the Constitution is that part which consists of the Bill of Rights. And therein lies the constitutional articulation and protection of human rights. It is not the constitutional creation of human rights. Human rights exist with the human person before the state, before the Constitution. And what are these rights? I think that in organized society, it consists of those entitlements which you and I, each and every one of us, are entitled to demand of each other and must accord to each other, in order that we may all live and let live with human dignity. These entitlements, they sound in civil liberties, they sound in respect for otherness, public participation, the necessities such as health, care, education, clothing. If clothing doesn't sound much, I assure you that you can die of cold quicker, not only than you can die of starvation, but even more quickly than you can die of thirst. In education, personal security, a right to property, however modest. The poor person's property is more precious to her or him than the vast fortune is to a rich person. And that right should be protected. And a tolerable standard of living. Is this important? Of course it is. Just ask yourself this question. If you think that you are so strong that you don't need all these things, what do you think if you see your children deprived of them? There's a proverb among the Patans that the greatest sovereignty is poverty. Well, if you are so tough, good luck to you. But don't impose it upon others. In expounding a secular constitution, mainly in the field of human rights, I have found my vocation for the last 2 decades or so. People ask me about my career. I say that I have made a living in commercial law. I have made a life in human rights. Has my religion pervaded my approach to my duties as a judge? Yes. And now I'm prepared to say what I wasn't prepared to say earlier, 100%. because it is also part of our religion to respect other peoples. Some years ago, in a seminar organized by the Chinese University of Hong Kong, of which Professor Frankel is a member, and the University of Cambridge, I sought to explain what the judiciary is really doing when it holds the government to account, when it exercises judicial review and constitutional review. And I illustrate what we're doing by quoting from the Sunnah. When the Holy Prophet said to the people, help your brother, whether he is the oppressed or the oppressor. And the people questioned how they were to help if he was the oppressor, and they were told by staying his hand from oppression. And when the judiciary holds the government to legal account, we are not doing anything against the government. We're helping them to fulfill their duty. One more illustration only now. Equality is one of the most important of human rights. Because if you look at the history of the world, you will see that so many struggles have been for equality. And can there be any more perfect understanding of equality than that of the Muslim man of whom I will now speak? Muslim army was at war with the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium. And they were vastly successful because of the spirit of the army. And the Eastern Roman Empire sent emissaries to the Muslim camp to talk peace. They asked to see the commander, and they were taken to a man who was squatting on the ground, cooking his meal. They said to him, we want to speak to the commander. He said, I am the commander. He said, but you are cooking your own food. He said, the Prophet told these men to follow my command in battle. He did not tell them to cook my food. Thank you very much.
I think that we have a lot to think about from both of our speakers. And at this time, we will open the floor to questions. As I said, please feel free to ask anything that comes to mind on the present topic or related topics. And please let us know, please, if you will, limit your questions to actual questions, but not to long presentations of your own. Okay, I already see some people in the audience. What we'll do is we'll pass the microphone to the audience members. And
do you have the preference of collecting questions or one by one?
Whatever is most efficient.
Okay, let's try one by one first and see how it goes.
okay, so yes.
Yes. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Professor Brown and Justice Bokhary, for your wonderful presentations. My question is related to human rights in China. Western countries, especially the United States, like to criticize China for violation of human rights. And the Chinese government has given a lot of excuses, or what the Western world sees as excuses. But I've actually talked with some Chinese politicians or government officials, and they've told me one of these explanations, which I want you to comment on, hopefully. So they say that we are concerned about these rights, for example, freedom to religion. But we do have certain restrictions at the current stage because China as a state is still very young, as a polity is very young. So for example, they say that we should prioritize the more basic rights. You talked about that sequence. So they say we should make sure that all people have food first to eradicate poverty in certain rural areas first. And then after that, maybe we can try to make religion a more more freely practiced thing in China. So what do you think about this explanation? Do you think it's an excuse, or do you think it's actually reasonable in some sense?
You guys don't have American football. There's something called punting. No. I mean, I think that I'm not going to evaluate an answer or evaluate an explanation or position. I mean, except to say that I think that this kind of question gets us immediately into what I was discussing, which is, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Which is, if you talk about human rights and you don't really have an agreement upon what basic human, for example, you could talk about sort of basic human rights, what are called like non-derogable, what's called non-derogable human rights. You can't, like for example, it's never okay to torture somebody. You can never say like, yeah, but I need to torture him, right? Whereas something like freedom is derogable in the sense that someone can commit a crime and be put in prison and have their freedom taken away. Or during a war, a state might say, we're going to place certain restrictions on expression because of a certain, current conditions, right? So these are, one society might say that the right to practice your religion, as long as it doesn't unduly burden others, is a basic human right, right? That you cannot take that away. It doesn't matter if people are hungry or not hungry, or you're at war or not war, right? So another society might say, okay, we agree with you, but we feel unduly burdened. Then you get into this debate about what, this person, we think, yes, everybody should have the right to practice their religion, but these people's religious practice is causing a burden on others in a more abstract way. Maybe you don't appreciate this, but we appreciate this. So quickly, this discourse, which is supposed to be agreed upon and unifying and sort of provide the framework for people to hold each other accountable in a way that they've all agreed to, it breaks down very quickly, This is why, there's a lot of people who say that, Western discourse on human rights is sort of an imperialist discourse, right? That it's about, that Western countries will impose these on others, hold others accountable, and not hold themselves accountable even to the same rights, let alone just, to the fact that the articulation of those rights to begin with might come out of a certain religious tradition, like a Christian religious tradition or a Western European religious tradition. But on the other hand, you could say that, look, there are basic rights we agree on, and certain things that governments do really are just, it's very hard to imagine anybody accepting these, right? In terms of what like the Chinese government says, or what if it's sincere or not, I just don't know enough about the topic to evaluate it.
As once been put, written in the human heart, teaching us what is to be done and what is to be fled. And none of these rights are truly in conflict with each other. But you know, the two great human rights instruments internationally now are the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, dealing, as its name tells you, with civil and political rights. And the other is the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, dealing with those rights identified in the very name of the covenant. Why two covenants? If one includes deaths from famine, war-related famine, and war-related disease, the estimate of the number of lives lost in the Second World War is between 50 million and 80 million. And in the aftermath of those horrors, humankind put their faith in world peace, in human rights. And that's why the General Assembly adopted in 1948 the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And the intention had been that the aspirations set out in the Universal Declaration would be followed by specific articulations of all of those rights, civil and political and social economic, in a single instrument. And the world community worked towards that end. Then there were two covenants. Why? Very simply this. The Western powers felt that concentration on socioeconomic rights would be used by the Eastern Bloc as an excuse for denying civil liberties. And the Eastern Bloc feared that civil and political rights will be used to undermine government power. None of this was insincere. A fear, even if not well-founded, is by its nature sincere. You can't be insincerely afraid. And therefore, I think that sometimes governments overstate their position. And on those occasions when they have been too apt to impose control, to suppress dissent, they say that kind of thing. And sometimes they deny socioeconomic rights, wrapping themselves in a sheet of virtue because of all the civil and political rights that they recognize. But you know, it has been said that free speech is very useless to a starving man. Not quite. You can stand up and point out why it is that he's starving. It was also said, it was said by an advocate, Andrew Hamilton, an American attorney, defending a publisher, Mr. John Zengler, in New York, at the time when America was still a British colony. Defending him on a charge of sedition. And he said that the man who loves his country puts its liberty first, well knowing that without liberty, life is miserable. It is a misery to be unfree. It's a misery to starve. We must pursue all of these rights and tolerate no unjustifiable delay of duty. And you don't need to accuse anybody of insincerity. You just have to say you are wrong.
To ask, especially in the light of what Justice Bokhary said about our role as individuals in terms of trying to voice out what we should do in terms of oppression or for oppressed or oppressor. I would like to ask, in terms of the issues, for example, of Palestine, of Kashmir, what should we do as Muslims in order to, for example, here in Hong Kong, what can we do, and how do we support or not support any of those movements overseas? Thank you.
Now, you are held in the way that you can. When the Soviet army was in Afghanistan, Pakistan was certainly in no position to intervene militarily, however justly they may have felt the cause. But they received the Afghan refugees. That's what they could do, and that's what they did do. It caused a lot of resentment among a lot of Pakistani people, and I remember many, many years ago, when the President of Pakistan was visiting Hong Kong, there was a huge gathering of the local Pakistani community, and some people expressed great dissatisfaction with the help that was being given to the Afghan refugees in Pakistan. I myself have laid eyes on a camp of 1 million people. And the minister had to respond to this. He said various things. And the one thing that he said most effectively was when he referred to the refugees as Gharib, Afghan Muhajir. And the atmosphere changed entirely, because the people remembered that the Prophet himself had once been a refugee. So it is not always that you will intervene militarily or in any other way, but you do what you can. You can't do more.
Regarding what the Chinese government is doing specifically, like aside from the listing what should our attitude to the Chinese government be? Because of what should our attitude to the Chinese government be because of what they are doing to the Western state, like Xinjiang and so on? Specifically with regard to the Chinese government, what should our attitude be? Specifically with regard to what the Chinese government
So you, faith has raided your duties when you were a judge. So is that was, if my understanding is right, what kind of problem you had being a Muslim judge in Hong Kong?
I'll answer the second question, then I will invite Professor Brown to deal with the first one. The second question really was, what were the problems that I had as a judge? A lack of knowledge of the law. Not being good enough a lawyer. And not having enough energy. But none of them sprung from being a Muslim.
Well, I swear, this Hong Kong audiences do not go easy on the speakers. I mean, I would just say, I mean, like, there's a great Arabic phrase, Ya gharib kun adib. Does anyone know this? You're a foreign person or guest, or be polite. So I'm gonna, you can discuss these things amongst yourselves. It's not my place to tell anybody what to do.
Yes, please, to the back.
I'll just speak without mic. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. If I use your example of Safi, my question would be, if in Islamic State, will they allow euthanasia? That's part A. If it's allowed in Islamic State, I'm not going to answer that. Second part would be, if it's allowed in Islamic State, how can we draw boundaries between suicidal killing and natural death? So you got my question.
Yeah, so you asked about, you said, regarding sati in an Islamic state, would it be allowed?
No, if they allow, like you said, there are accounts of sati being done under the Islamic ruling. So my question would be, in a modern day, would Islamic State allow euthanasia? If it's allowed. If it's allowed. Then the second part of the question would be, how do we draw boundaries between suicidal killing and a natural death?
I feel like I'm Luke Skywalker or something. Doesn't that sound like a lightsaber? It's the closest I've ever gotten to having a functioning lightsaber. That's an interesting question. So, I mean, there's a important, it's not that, it's important to remember that, okay, first of all, I'll say that we have, as far as I know, obnoxiously, annoyingly little information about how Muslim scholars and rulers actually thought about sati. Because, as far as I know, I've never found any jurists, any like fuqaha talking about it. I think that's because they deferred to the rulers on issue because it's a religious minority issue. We don't have a lot of the, as far as I know, and I could be wrong, and if anyone knows, please correct me, we don't have a lot of even court or like sort of political discussion around sati from the Delhi Sultanate period onward, because I don't think these guys talked a lot about this stuff. I mean, but it's important to distinguish their approach to that and something like euthanasia today, because for them this was a religious issue. So where another really interesting area you can see this in is in Muslim scholars talking about Zoroastrian immediate family incestuous marriages. It's called the Khotadeh marriage. The majority position amongst Muslim scholars is that Muslim judge could not himself be involved in the marriage, but that Muslims would allow Zoroastrians living under Muslim rule to engage in immediate family incestuous marriage. Even though Muslims considered this to be, not only did they consider it prohibited in Islam, they considered it to be prohibited even just almost like on a natural law level. Right? It was sort of disgusting to them. But because it was a religious practice, they allowed it, right? On the other hand, if you looked at how they dealt with riba, and this goes all the way back to the Prophet ﷺ in the Sunan of Abu Dawud. There's a fascinating report where the Prophet sends a messenger to Najran. Najran is Christian, was mostly Christians at that point. Najran's now on the border between Saudi Arabia and Yemen. It's in Saudi Arabia, but it's on the border of Yemen. And he says that we will not interfere with your religion, with your bishops, with your priests. Just send us X amount of taxes, and but you cannot do riba. So why is he saying you can't do riba? Because this is hurting other people. Right? So this is exploitative practice. So you want to burn yourself to death, because it's a religious practice. You want to marry your immediate family member because it's a religious practice. We don't sense any exploitation there, but usury is exploitative. The difference between euthanasia and, I think euthanasia would not be a religious matter, right? So if someone was saying they wanted to kill themselves out of religious duty, that'd be very different than saying they want to kill themselves because they are unhappy or they're in pain or something. And then it simply gets to a question of how Muslim scholars want to think about euthanasia, right? I mean, there's a whole Islamic medical ethics discussion on euthanasia. So you could either take how Muslims talk about this and assume that we're going to apply this to other traditions, let's say non-Muslims living under Muslim rule. Or you could say that another option would be to say that because it's forbidden in their religions, we're going to defer to their religious legal systems and not allow it because they don't allow it for themselves. But for Muslims, it would be a matter of an Islamic legal discussion. It wouldn't have anything to do with other religious groups.
Yes. Can you save it?
Very short, very short.
Okay.
Very short, very short. If Islam on one side stresses the importance of sanctity of life, and on the other side, if they allow such to happen, wouldn't that cause kind of contradiction?
Yeah, I mean, so there's sanctity of life, but you also have right to religious practice. So if your religion, I mean, it's also Muslims have sanctity of, like, you cannot engage in incestuous, immediate family incestuous marriages in Islamic law. I mean, this was like absolutely repulsive to Muslim scholars, but this was actually allowed under Zoroastrian law, under their religious law. So, but you either have to say that we're going to honor their, I mean, there's all sorts of things you could look at. For example, I mean, it's interesting in Christianity, right? If you think of a Christian who lives under Muslim rule, they either believe that the Prophet Muhammad was a liar or was crazy. I mean, there's no, like, their religious existence is necessarily an insult to the Prophet. But no one ever, but they were allowed to do that. Because that was, once you allow you affirm their right to religious practice, you take with that a whole group of, you make a lot of compromises about your values. Because you've affirmed their right, your affirmation of their right to practice and to believe certain things.
I'm going to ask my question based on the perspective of someone with a disability. I was blessed to go to a very nice school where they were mostly Westerners, and they were very big on human rights, big on inclusion, big on equality, and big on integration. So I felt normal. I felt like I was just like everyone else. And I'm also blessed with Islam. They're all blessed with Islam. Their prophets are also big on human rights. They're big on standing up for others, standing up for anyone, permissible or peace or mosque. But it's very unfortunate that in some areas within the Muslim community, they forgot how the prophets were. I mean, there's teasing, there's bullying, there's making fun of others. But I try to ignore that, and I try to contribute regardless. I try to write. I try to work on aspects of Islamic history, like the women in Islam series, to bring awareness how people were in the past. But if I bring up that to anyone that someone treated me in a wrong way, I'm just labeled as that disabled person. So I'm trapped, and there are some places within the community my parents don't want me to go, even though I want to go, because I want to contribute, I want to show up, I don't want to hide. But I don't know how to stand up or bring awareness without being labeled or trapped or judged. Like sometimes my parents want me to go to the UK because it's a Western environment, people might be more open-minded, even Muslims. But I don't think that's the answer. I was thinking it's kind of something.
Now, if there is in any way that mother and daughter doesn't see things entirely the same, then I'm not going to, on a public occasion, a public forum, say something which may support one side or the other. But if Basma will take you to my house one day for us to have a meal, we'll sit down and talk about it.
Father is also there.
Assalamu Thank you for your talk on human rights. One of the questions that I'm here.
Oh, okay.
One of the questions that I really used to ponder upon was that explaining the idea of human rights to a non-Muslim or an atheist who doesn't believe in an omniscient and omnipotent God is it starts off with the other person asking me, like, for example, one of the most important stories, not only for Islam but also for Christianity and Judaism, is the sacrifice of Isaac, where God tells Abraham to sacrifice his son. So, what are the human rights of Isaac in that story? For example, like as a human being, he was in some of the stories he's probably age 7 or 9 when God tells Abraham to sacrifice his son. So what happens to his human rights? And the idea, what I'm trying to understand is that the idea of human rights, when humans define it by themselves, it becomes very complicated, because when God defines it through the Quran or the Bible or through any of his revelations, he defines the human rights for the soul. So it has to be before the soul reaches the body, or how else would you put it? Like, each human has the same rights, because some humans are born with disabilities, some are born perfect. So,
I mean, I want to answer your question. Sometimes my flight leaves tomorrow at, I don't know, sometimes in the afternoon. I mean this. With your mom's permission, if you want to go anywhere in Hong Kong, I'll go with you. And if somebody says something mean to you, I'll smack them in the back of their head as hard as I can, because that really pisses me off. It's just the idea that somebody would say something insulting about God's creation makes me so angry, it makes my blood boil, you know? This is absolutely, completely unacceptable for Muslims to do this. It's despicable. Those people should really think about what would happen to them if they were suddenly in a wheelchair, how they're going to be treated. These people are small-minded morons who don't think or reflect or have any empathy, and maybe because they have other problems in their lives or something like that, or maybe because they're just jackasses. But I'm serious. You want to go someplace, we'll go there, wherever, and they can make fun of the well-dressed white guy, see how they feel. Utilize white privilege or whatever, get some use from it. We can talk more after this. The question about, remember, the child wasn't actually sacrificed. So that's important. So his human rights weren't violated. I mean, I'm just making that clear, right? So, and the idea is that we were talking about this yesterday, right? If you're a prophet, right? If you have direct communication with God, there's no sitting around being like, does God exist? I don't know, man. Does God exist? Yes, God exists. Because he's talking to you. Okay? I don't know. What does God want from me? He just told you what he wants from you. Now this is the Abrahamic question, which is, if God tells you to do something, are you going to do it or not? Are you going to obey God or not? If God is the creator and master of the universe, your creator, and he tells you to do something, are you going to do it? And the answer is yes. Now, God doesn't actually want Isaac or this child to die, Ishmael to die. So he doesn't. It's interesting, by the way, in the Mu'tazilite tradition of theology, Mu'tazilite Muslim rationalist tradition, they didn't believe. So in the Quran, Abraham says, I saw this. I saw that I had a dream or a vision or a revelation that I would do this. The Mu'tazilites didn't accept that God had actually commanded it. Why? Because it's inconceivable to them that God could even command, even as part of a test, command something unjust. So that for them, like Abraham had a dream that was he mistook what was the commandment. So the point is, it's interesting that there's, even in the Islamic tradition, obviously it's a minority position, it's not the mainstream Sunni position, but there was, they didn't accept the standard interpretation of this Quranic story, which is, by the way, a lot less clear than the Old Testament, right? So maybe the Mu'tazilites are right. I'm not saying, I don't know if there are or not. But either way, just to bring up the kind of the Abraham Isaac or Abraham Ismail story as a case of failing in human rights is wrong because one, human rights weren't violated. Two, it misses the whole point. I'm not saying that's your position. I'm saying the position of the person who's asking this.
Yeah, I might add also that in the Quranic account, Abraham's son was consensual. He complied.
Yeah,
this is not a violation of rights.
Yeah, so he said, I can, I also obey God.
For both the speakers, you mentioned about the tradition of sati and burning a human and how that might be allowed today, but looking at the laws today, it would probably not be allowed on the basis of public morality, public health, etc. And it's like the Honourable Justice mentioned that post-World War II laws have come to be about holding yourself to a higher moral ground, and it goes beyond state sovereignties to a certain human rights go beyond state sovereignty, the traditional view of it. So even euthanasia has laws governing it. Even disposal of dead bodies, even by consent, has laws governing it. For example, you cannot consent to being eaten after you're dead because that would be against public health, morality, etc. So factually, it doesn't perhaps matter anymore who first came up with human rights. What eventually happened is that Muslims did mess up somewhere along the way and failed to prove that the conception of human rights that we have is the better one. To the point that today we have come to a place where Muslim states are mostly the ones that are viewed as the greater violators, the ones with more reservations to every convention. So moving ahead from here, my question is that as a Muslim, whether you are a Muslim academic participating in such discussions and discourse, or you are a Muslim state trying to hold your ground, or you're just a Muslim minority in state. Do you take it ahead then as a discussion on why, on one, that it's my religious right, the right to religion, or why this right is at a higher moral ground? Because that's what all rights have been reduced to now. It's all about which one is supported by the better moral position in reasoning. So how do we take it ahead now? Just a religious right, or this is the better moral right, we can still bring that back up on the table?
Well, since you began your question in the context of something, if the information is not enough, even for the great scholar, Professor Brown, to know exactly what was the thinking of the university leaders, then I just have to guess. And I suspect that they would have realized that any interference with something, even requiring permission, and the permission really was not so much permission as an investigation into voluntariness on the part of the woman. I think they would have realized that even requiring that would be perceived by the person who wanted to follow that custom as some oppression of a religious nature. But you know, sometimes you say, I don't actually care if your attitude is that, but you actually think I am suppressing you in your religion. Well, maybe I do care, but I don't care enough to back off because this is so simple. But what if now you have a situation where the woman herself, not somebody who believes in old customs, or may think it's more convenient to get rid of her rather than support her, or may even think, as in, I think, some communities, that that's one way of preventing the wife from murdering the husband. But now you are talking about the woman herself. And if even she would feel that she was being oppressed in her religious freedom, then that's a point of view that really would matter to me. And if I was a Muslim governor in that kind of situation, I would be a very good one. But I would probably say that if they generally are unhappy with our system requiring an interview, then that is unfortunate but cannot be helped. But we do require an interview and then perhaps give permission after the interview, because if this woman herself felt that she was being oppressed, that is a point of view that would matter to us. Now, there's not the slightest doubt, if you look around the world, there may be very great human rights violations in a country which calls itself Islamic. Well, that just makes us have to renew and redouble our efforts. I remember reading a book written by a very learned person, and he said, you know, some people believe that when ultimately Islam triumphs, that will be because all these countries which we identify as Muslim countries become powerful. He said, I don't know why we should assume that at all. Maybe it just means that some country, very powerful now, which is not an Islamic country, will become what we will generally recognize as Islamic country. Like the United States of America, for example. Why does the power of Islam have to evolve the countries which call themselves Muslim now becoming powerful. Maybe it is some country which is already powerful becoming Muslim. But it's a worldwide thing, and ultimately we each have to stand before God on the day of judgment, and we do our best. And we do our best not just for the purity of our souls, but also concern for others. So I've not answered your question very well. I would be very suspicious of anybody who could give a very good answer to such a difficult question. It is a thought-provoking question, and we will all go away and think about it more.
I would like to ask a question, maybe some of the speakers mind it. The reason is that we are doing so much research on human rights, Islamic and Western perspectives. If you see that we have a lot of books, we have a lot of papers in a very good impact factor or journals, you have seen a lot of. I would like to ask this question, is there any impact of our publications or over these books on the worldwide human rights? Because all the major powers, if you have a more power or majority or something is just like you have a more people around you, you can enforcement of any law to any country. Is it the human right? My question is that is it a human right? We are not following the even nation rights. Some nations only oppress the other nations. We are talking about only a small portion. What is your idea about that? If our research is doing some impact factor on the natural human being, or it is actually implemented, or what are the major results?
Now look, the nation state is well recognized now, and to some extent it contributes to the realization of human rights. And in some ways it runs counter to human rights. A very great anthropologist once said that there can be no doubt that the average Stone Age individual had more freedom than the average citizen of a liberal democracy today. We have organized ourselves in community. Why? We organize ourselves in community because we enjoy each other's personalities and because it is conducive to human existence. And we have increased these communities to the point of creating a nation state. And some of these states will oppress their own people. And some of these states will oppress other nations. This says nothing against the content of human rights. If you want to know what human rights is, you don't have to get a lot of books or to listen to some old judge like me speaking. You just look at your heart, that's where the human rights will be. What lawyers are concerned with is how to deliver them. It's one thing for me to say that you have certain rights. It's another thing to have those rights delivered to you. So the purity of human rights is never affected by these things. But in the world in which we live, there are violations of human rights within nations, across international boundaries, and sometimes it's felt that denying a human right in any given case may have some advantage. Well, I assure you that according to human rights is not always easy. and sometimes it's downright dangerous. And if you deny human rights, to torturing people, for example, you might even achieve a short-term gain, or what looks like a short-term gain. But the road back will be long, and the road back will be difficult. So we have to remember the pure existence of human rights. We have to concern ourselves with how to deliver it as a practical proposition. We should react against denials of human rights, but never allow those denials to shake our confidence in it. It should increase our confidence. You know, I try to do what I can, and ultimately what's going to happen? I'm going to die trying, unless you think that I'm going to give up before I die, and others will take over. And I'm confident in those who will take over, because they include my grandchildren.
I just want to add one thing to answer that question, which is that I think the bigger question you're asking is, does might make right, or are even the mighty restrained at times by principled or notional moral or religious rules that stay their hand, that stay someone who could get what they want from taking what they want? And I think the answer is obviously yes, of course, but I think here, like, the human rights question is, I would make it broader, just about any right. I mean, you could look at, there's some places in human history, some states or governments or communities where people have just taken what they wanted and killed who they wanted with impunity. And a lot of other places where that's not the case. And the things that have restrained the powerful are religion or law or commitments or some fear of some accountability, right? And so, I think it's tempting to just say, well, none of this stuff matters because in the end, countries just do whatever they want, governments just do whatever they want, it's all just a game, political game, word game. But that's not true. I just don't think that's true. I mean, it can appear true at times, and in certain categories of life or in certain registers of the way we look at the world, but it's not true all the time or everywhere. I mean, I'll sit around and criticize the U.S. government until we can sit here for like 10 hours. I'll just criticize the U.S. government. I'll criticize U.S. society, all this stuff like that. But I'll tell you one thing in the U.S., freedom of religion is very strong. You can go and say, I'm a Jedi Knight. My brother-in-law and my sister are in the Army. They're lawyers in the Army, right? So if you're in the Army, in the U.S. Army, you say, I'm a Jedi Knight. I believe in the Jedi religion, and I need to wear a lightsaber on my belt and do this like weird force exercise every 2 hours. An Army lawyer will come and sit there and take everything you say, just like you're a Christian or you're a Jew or you're a Muslim. And to the extent that it's possible that it doesn't interfere with your duties or uniform, they will let you the Jedi Knight, the lightsaber, do the Jedi Knight meditation, stuff like that. So I mean, there are some parts of the world and some places and some times where rights really do mean a heck of a lot. And so, we just try to push for, push the failures into successes, or at least encourage them in that direction.
Actually, I have a question in my head, but it's kind of hard to express it. So I'll try my best to ask it. It's regarding the rights of humans during war, of combatants and non-combatants. For example, we can look at from both the Islamic history and the non-Islamic history. Where Islamic history, even in Alwaleed, where we Muslims took the caravan of the Quraysh, or for example, recent history of Iraq, where the U.S. were taking the oil fields and whatnot of the locals over there. So why is it suddenly okay during wartime to take the property of another human being, but not okay during times of peace? But in reality, is it really human rights? Is it really just an idea, a theory, where in practice it doesn't really work? And is it, I mean, in my eyes, it just seems like something, like it's, as a Muslim, I would just say it's the rights given by God in the Quran. Because in the Quran, we can take like the spoils of war or whatnot. So, does that, sorry, I don't know if this makes
No,
sense.
that's a great question.
It's never a question only of theory. No matter how dreadful the violation, you only have to pick up the newspapers to see children tortured to death by the mother and the boyfriend together, or neglected. What more serious violation of a child's right to life could there be? But that doesn't relegate those rights to the realm of theory. Murders occur. They don't violate the existence of the right. They are just instances in which the right is violated. I wouldn't like to be a murder victim. Still less would I like to be a murderer. And if the choice was between murdering somebody and being murdered, I would choose to be murdered. So yes, there are many instances in which there's a violation of it in the course of peace and in the course of war. And sometimes the violation would be acknowledged. You might say, yes, so what? You may have all these rights, I couldn't care less about your rights. It's to my advantage to do this. Or sometimes somebody might make some excuse, which they sincerely believe, or they don't. I mean, I suppose if the drug trafficker was really asked whether he thought he was doing something wrong in hooking the child into the drug habit, I don't suppose he would waste too much time debating it. He couldn't care less, but I suppose he would actually say, yeah, it's wrong, but so what? So what could be worse? What could be a greater surrender to those who violate human rights than for those who believe in it to lose their faith in human rights because of those violations? That would be the greatest surrender.
I would just add that, remember that rights aren't, I mean, there's some rights that everybody has all the time and it can't be taken away from them in any just way. You can't be tortured or something like that, at least that's what I think. Otherwise, like, there's circumstances in which you can lose your rights. And in conflict, right, the idea is that if you have engaged in fact a just war, right? So whether it's just war in whatever theory or jihad, right? So if you are righteous and correct in the path that is taking you into conflict, and usually that means that the other party has transgressed or initially or started the war or whatever, right? They've forfeited some of their rights to property. They don't forfeit all their rights to property in Islamic law. You can't destroy their plants, you can't destroy their trees, orchards, things like that. But in terms of their, other wealth, right, that can be seized, or the weapons they have. One could argue that this is to compensate the army or the soldiers or its damage or something. But either way, there's some. It's not without reason that this right to property has been removed on those things for those people.
like, I'll just give you an analogy. Like, for instance, if China was to go to war with the US, right? And just hypothetical, right? So, and let's just say I have a caravan of my goods. Is it in both? I don't know about the Western one, but I mean, probably not the Western as well. But for Islamic one, it seems okay for, like, for example, some of the U.S. troops to come attack me to get my goods, even though I'm just a citizen of China, for example. But I'm not like actively fighting the war. No, I'm just a citizen. I may or may not agree with the country's ideologies and whatnot, but does it make it okay for them to take my goods just because I'm a citizen of that country?
That's a good question. I mean, the idea here is that, you know, you're not transporting some military caravan, right? You're just a guy bringing, you know, 3 pounds of halal dim sum to someone else to get attacked by the American troops, or the Muslim troops in this case, right? Can they take the halal dim sum? They can't hurt you because you're not a combatant, right? So you're not going to be hurt, but can they take the goods? That's actually an interesting question. I don't know the answer to that. I'm going to look into that, and if you come and give me your email, I will tell you what I find.
Okay, we have time for maybe 2 more questions. Yes, brother.
Assalamu alaikum. Nothing political. When I was a kid, the adage, spare the rod and spoil the child, was a very common adage, one that I to some extent agree with. As a kid in school, our headmaster had 3 canes used on naughty students. About 40 years ago, caning was an accepted punishment in the statute books in Hong Kong. Today, because of human rights, corporal punishment has been banned in many Western countries. It's not on in Hong Kong schools anymore, and probably parents can get into trouble with corporal punishment. What's the Islamic perspective on corporal punishment as a human right?
I'm not going to make any friends with this one, but look, in the Islamic tradition, so corporal punishment, that sort of the antipathy of the corporal punishment is a very specific outgrowth of Western culture in the early modern period. The idea of using prison as the way to deal with criminal offenses is very unusual in human history. It's expensive, it's infrastructure heavy. So in general, not just for Islamic tradition, but most legal traditions, like, you know, corporal punishment is very useful because you get it done, person's done, they go out, they go back to work, you know, and the process is ended relatively cheaply.
Quick and cheap.
Yeah. So my personal opinion is I think prison is far more barbaric than corporal punishment. It's barbaric and it's idiotic. I mean, the idea that you're going to reform people by sticking them around a bunch of other criminals is interesting. And my country has the world's largest prison population and the 2nd largest per capita prison population, and that doesn't really seem to do much for the type of crimes people actually get put in prison for, like drug possession and things like that. And it just destroys families. It's a horrific system. It's horrific. And the idea that, you know, you don't even strike children, again, is sort of, I don't think this is the result of some human progress, thinking about rights or morality. I think this is a very specific way of thinking about how we view, it's a luxury product of a luxury society, in this case, modern American society. And even in the US, it's interesting, you see a big cultural disagreement between like people in the African American community, where corporal punishment is still really common with children. And that the general community at large, which just really looks down on this, so that every once in a while this will bubble up in like some scandal because some NFL player will say that, you know, his mama had hit him when he was a kid or something. It was, oh, that's so uncivilized. But I mean, what's the answer that you're offering, like liberal parent? You know, talk to the kid. You know, talk to a 2-year-old kid, 3-year-old kid, explain to them why they're doing something wrong. I mean, I think that a lot of these are theories about shaping society that are not only unproven, we don't have the results for them, but I think they will almost inevitably have very bad results. And I don't see why we would remove from parents the right to reasonable discipline, reasonable physical discipline, which is in fact what people have in the United States, as far as in most jurisdictions. From the Islamic tradition, I think it's essentially reasonable physical discipline. For courts, you have limits on how many lashes you can do, what type of lashes you can do, and that's based on the different schools of law. But they're actually pretty low, to the extent that if you look at, let's say, Roman law in the Eastern Roman Empire, what was considered to be excessive, like where you're getting into excessive beating for a slave, for example. John Chrysostom, the famous 4th century preacher, would talk about, you know, if you're hitting your slave 35 times, this is wrong, you know? Well, I mean, that's above the limit of most madhabs for what you're allowed to inflict in court. So Islamic law was really like a lot lower, had, again, a very conservative limit on number of strikes. And the general rule was, for domestic disciplining of children and things, was darb mubarrah. You can't strike the person in such a way that it's going to cause injury or mark or things like that. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, we no longer have time for any more questions today. I knew this would happen, and I could have predicted it because our speakers are just so knowledgeable, and I know that you all have so many questions. But what I can say is, inshallah, we will have other opportunities in the future to draw upon their knowledge. I encourage you to go out and get Professor Brown's books and read his articles. They will answer many of the questions that you may have. And I just want to thank all of you for your very thoughtful questions. I think they really brought out a lot of truth, as we were hoping they would. I would like to thank, of course, Justice Bokhary and Professor Brown for giving us their time and sharing their knowledge, their wisdom, and also I think their passion and compassion with us today. It was very gratifying for me personally. I hope it was for you too. So please, again, join me in thanking them.
For all our speaker and moderator for a very intelligent and informative discussion. We have come to an end of this public lecture. The Union is deeply grateful for the hearty cooperation of all speakers, volunteers, and participants. I would like to call upon Brother A.R. Safai, Chairman of the Islamic Union of Hong Kong, to present souvenirs to our speakers. Professor Jonathan Brown, please.
Oh, you get something.
Oh, I love these things.
The Honourable Mr. Justice Bokhary. Thank you.
It's like
Last but not least, Professor James Frankel.
I think